My name is Laurel. I am an associate at Catalyst Ed. Welcome to the pre-application webinar for Catalyst Ed's Expert Network. I'm super excited that all of you are interested in applying or learning more about Catalyst Ed, what we do, and how you can join our 470 plus individual strong network of education experts. So as you can see on the current slide, if you're having problems accessing the Zoom webinar by computer, you can also access it by audio through these numbers that are listed. And then you'll be prompted to enter the webinar ID, which is on the screen right now. So I'm going to be manning the technical assistance role throughout the webinar. So if you have any questions, let me know in the chat box or email me at info@catalysted.org. I'm actually going to put that in the chat box right now to make sure you guys heard that correctly. So as we wait for everyone to join, please note that the chat and the Q&A features are going to be the primary ways that everyone is going to be able to interact with us throughout the webinar. And make sure you're comfortable using those right now. So at the bottom right of your screen, you're going to be able to access the Q&A feature, and to the right of your screen is the chat box. So probably go to the next slide. Yeah. And throughout the time, I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A answer box. So put your questions in at any time, and we're going to address them at the end of the webinar. And I'm going to take note of any submissions to make sure that we answer everything. Additionally, in a couple of instances throughout the webinar, we're going to put out some polling questions to just kind of get a sense of, who this group is, what they're interested in Catalyst Ed's expert network for. So make sure that you're answering those as they come up. And lastly, feel free to use the chat box to interact with us throughout the time. That means like questions, comments, inter-participant dialogue, or just comments on direct messages to any of the panelists if you have questions. And if you'd like something to be answered privately, just, again, email me in the address that's in the chat box right now. I think Luana is going to take it from here.
Great. Thanks so much, Laurel. I am going to go ahead and do a tech transfer while we are speaking, and hopefully this won't spoil everything. Hi, all. First of all, welcome to the Catalyst Ed webinar. We are so excited to have an almost full house today. So thank you all for making the time in the middle of, depending on what's going on with you, either in the middle of a very busy schedule or in the middle of summer. So we are super excited to see the kind of response we received to this selection cycle, and are excited to also share with you a little bit about what our work is and our model is, but then also what we are hoping to see through the selection process. So now that said, let me go ahead and share my screen and keep my fingers crossed that I don't break anything. Laurel, Bibi, let me know if I broke anything in the process of doing this, okay? So just like send me messages or shout loudly or something. Once again, my name is Leona Christie. I'm the founder and CEO of Catalyst Ed, and you should be able to see me on top of the screen. And also on the webinar today are Bibi Ryan and Laurel. Bibi will be taking you through the selection process and application tips. And she's been hugely instrumental and has played a lead role in terms of helping us put all of this together right from the inception of Catalyst Ed. And then, of course, all three of us will chime in during the Q&A process towards the end. Great, so let's start with a little bit of an overview on Catalyst Ed. As Laurel mentioned beforehand, if you have any questions, just feel free to send us a quick message through the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and we'll figure out what makes sense in terms of responding to it either immediately or later on during the Q&A time. So this here is a little bit about what Catalyst Ed is in a sentence. So we unlock the collective expertise in education, essentially creating ecosystems of support that education leaders, so leaders of schools, school systems, nonprofits, and foundations, so that they can access the expert capacity and support they need in order to innovate, excel, and scale. We see that the sector for the longest time has focused a lot in terms of getting new talent into the sector. And we think there is a strong need for us to identify and leverage the expertise we already have, so that we are creating the kind of systems as well as outcomes for students and families, especially those who are most in need. So when I launched Catalyst Ed about 2.5 years ago now, these were the challenges I saw. I saw education leaders who were increasingly looking to take on challenging projects that would help them innovate, excel, and scale, but often not knowing how to go about it, where to start, knowing that there are folks out there who might provide them with help, but not knowing how to identify who's out there, not having enough information to help them figure out whom to work with. And some education leaders definitely had limited experience leveraging that external help. At the same time, I was seeing a lot of really great experts, both individuals as well as organizations, who had a lot of skills and experiences that were incredibly valuable to the sector. However, the challenge that they faced is that they had no visibility into organization needs. And the high cost of just connecting with all of the education leaders often became a barrier to participation. So we were just not leveraging the full breadth and depth of expertise in the sector. And finally, at the sector level, because we had no real information on the demand and supply of expertise, we weren't really taking concerted action to fill any gaps. And at the same time, there was lack of systems to foster accountability as well as share learnings as all of these leaders were doing their individual projects. So in essence, Catalyst Ed was envisaged as a neutral ground that would help education leaders and experts connect with each other. A big part of it as well was putting in place the systems, the information, the knowledge, etc., that would help us identify what we saw as individual sparks of light, so great projects happening across the country, but really in their own silos, and converging them all into this powerful beam of light that could illuminate the way for others as well. So at its simplest, that's what we are. So Catalyst Ed is that online platform connecting education leaders with experts. More broadly, however, our work consists of 4 streams. Activate, which is essentially a big part of what we're doing here right now, which is identifying, vetting, and supporting diverse networks of expert talent, both individuals as well as organizations, and across a range of areas relevant to education organizations. Connect, which is leveraging technology, tools, and information to help leaders connect with experts as well as experts connect with each other. Catalyze, which is building expert hubs to accelerate the creation of ecosystems of support in high need areas like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I would encourage you to check out our DEI Expert Hub at deiexperthub.org if you haven't already done so. And we see ourselves creating similar expert hubs in other high need, high impact areas as well. And finally, through Inform, we are creating open source tools and resources based on the unique vantage point that we have in the sector, so that we are building collective knowledge and capacity. So we are working with over 225 partners around the country. The map is not fully up to date here. And as Laurel mentioned up front, we have over 470 experts. So we've really grown in size and scope and scale over the last 2.5 years. What is truly exciting for me, however, is that 97% of projects have either met or exceeded the goals set at the start of the project. And this really speaks to how much value the experts in our network have added and brought in to the partners that we work with. One of the favorite parts of my role is to see the post-project evaluations come in and just get a sense of how much enthusiasm and excitement there is from partners when they see that a project has wrapped up successfully. So one of the questions we often get is about our project portfolio. So this is kind of a quick snapshot of the different kinds of projects that we see. So areas talks about the different project areas. And as you can see, there are some projects which are very much in the organizational development, management, consulting kind of space. So the strategy, fundraising, evaluation, human capital, etc. And then we also have a set of projects that tend to be much more focused on school academic areas as well as school operational areas. So that's a little bit about project areas. We also like thinking about projects in terms of type. So a distinction here in a sense is that the areas are domains, but you could have different types of projects related to that one specific domain. So you could have a curriculum and assessments project that has a strong research component to it, or a strong implementation component to it, or a strong evaluation component to it. So as we go through our selection process, part of what we're trying to do is not just get a sense of where people bring domain expertise, but also what kind of projects, what types of projects are they best set up to succeed in. As far as the organizations that we work with, the partners that we connect our experts with, they are foundations, nonprofits, schools and school systems, and edtech companies. Quite often what happens is that even if we are connecting, if the project itself connects a school or school system with an expert, the project might actually be funded by a foundation. So, that's just to give you a sense of the different kinds of organizations. And finally, in terms of sectors, the bulk of our work tends to be in K-12 education. We do have an after-school expert hub, and through that we get several out-of-school time projects. And then we have a handful of projects that are in early childhood, higher education, and CTE. And I think part of what we will be doing in the next year or so is really build out the portfolio of projects in these other areas as well. A little bit about the expert profiles of the experts in our network. So of the 470 odd experts, we have both independent consultants, so individuals, as well as firms. And the independent consultants, several of them, most of them are, what they focus on is consulting right now, and they bring a range of skills from different organization types as well as different project areas. We do have a small but significant proportion of people who are part-time consultants, or we also call them diversifiers in the organization. So these are leaders who have full-time roles within organizations. So they may be executive directors, chief academic officers, etc., who feel like they've built out a strong skill set and are eager to try out projects on the side. So that's kind of what our independent consultant or our solo operator profile looks like. We also have several large national as well as regional firms. So this includes the traditional consulting firms, but then it also includes several nonprofits that are doing that see themselves as also providing services or fee-based services. And those tend to be both national organizations as well as some smaller, more regional firms. What they all share is strong expertise in one or more areas relevant to K-12 education. So pretty much everyone has had either direct experience in K-12 education or has really strong expertise in an area which might be relevant to K-12 education and may not require quite as much sector knowledge. So an example of that, for example, is website development, where we do have a few folks who bring strong tech expertise and may not have had quite as much K-12 education. They also bring relevant experience, and typically most people have at least 5 to 7 years of experience. The average tends to be closer to 10. They all bring a deep sense of purpose. And I think this is one of the things that has really shone through in some of the post-project evaluations. The people that we've seen really be successful as well as gain true champions in the partners that they work with are folks who bring an aligned sense of purpose, as well as values that support the work. And finally, we do look for experience with project-based work. However, as Bibi will take you through in just a bit, we define projects. You need not have actual consulting experience. We are also looking for folks who may have done project-based work within organizations itself. The reason why we think the distinction of project-based work is important is because anything that's project-based has a defined time frame. There are things that need to be delivered, and so it requires a specific set of skills that can be very, very valuable. Finally, let me speak a little bit to our values here in this kind of overview of Catalyst Ed. These are the 5 values that we have identified and recognized as being really core to our work. These are values that we live by at Catalyst Ed itself, and we are increasingly seeing that many of these values are also reflected in the work that our experts in the network, in the work that the experts in our network do. So now let me kind of shift a little bit to the more tactical or operational parts of our work. So this is how our model works as far as the project matching itself is concerned. So when organizations or education leaders reach out to us, they either reach out to us through our website. A few of them sometimes reach out through email as well. They typically reach out to us with kind of a one-line description. We have an evaluation project, or we have a recruitment project. We then have a follow-up conversation with them where we dig a little bit deeper into what are they looking for, what are the specific challenges that they're facing, why do they want to take on this project right now, what does success look like, what does their budget and timeline look like. And through that whole process, we help them develop a mini RFP. In general, our approach through these conversations is to help leaders access the information and perspectives they need to make choices around how to think of the project scope. However, we do not actually dictate projects. So the result of that scoping conversation is a mini RFP that outlines what exactly organizations are looking for and why. Once we have that RFP signed off by leaders, we then share that scope with the experts in the network through our technology platform, and we invite them to respond. One of the questions we often get here is there any kind of compulsion on how many projects experts need to respond to, or is there a requirement around number of hours or anything like that? Absolutely not. So our role is to share the scopes with you if we think that that the project is aligned to your skill set, but it's entirely up to you whether you want to respond to it or not. If you do decide to respond to the project scope, then you would essentially pull together a quick response. It could be anything from quick a few line answers to a couple of questions, which you just enter into the form itself, or it could be a 2 to 3 page project proposal. We rarely ask or expect proposals that are longer than 3 pages, unless the project is really, a $250,000 plus project. And in general, folks get about 2 weeks to respond to projects that they're interested in. Once the deadline for the RFP or the mini scope closes, education leaders have access to our platform, and they can actually log in and look at the different responses and proposals, and then decide who they want to interview and then who they want to work with. So one point of clarification here is that we don't tell people whom to work with. The leaders themselves look at different options, look at pricing, and they decide what makes the most sense. And finally, once the project itself starts, we build in places where there is an opportunity for both organization leaders as well as experts to share feedback with each other. So that looks like a mid-project check-in form that gets shared across both entities, as well as a post-project feedback form that happens once the project itself ends. So, one of over the last 2 years or so, we've gained an appreciation of what experts gain through their participation in the Catalyst Ed network. And these are some of the things that we've been hearing from folks in the network. So I think the first thing is access to vetted opportunities. And the reason vetted is in quotes is because we obviously cannot fully check everything, but we do ask hard questions around the organization's readiness to take on the work, as well as the kinds of resources and budgets that they have to support the project. So a big outcome of that is that when you get a project opportunity, you know that it's not someone just fishing for information and trying to get a sense of who's out there. These are real projects. And we've had very few projects fall through, and typically that's because funding that was pretty much allocated did not come through, or there was a change in leadership. The second thing that's related to this is visibility into organization needs. So even when the experts in our network have not responded to opportunities because they are fully booked out or something, or they're not fully interested, they have appreciated this knowledge about the kinds of expertise and the kinds of projects that different organizations in the sector are looking for. The second thing that's been incredibly helpful to the experts in the network is access to feedback. Unfortunately, as a sector, we are still not very comfortable sharing feedback. And so the mid-project check-ins become this moment for both the expert as well as the partner to take a step back, reflect on how the project is going, and think about what needs to be improved. And so this has been both helpful from the expert's perspective. It's both been helpful to know that the project is doing well and that the partner is happy with how things are moving, but also to kind of share feedback on things like we haven't got all of the information we were hoping to get, and that sometimes there are cross connections with different people on the team. And from our perspective at Catalyst Ed, it's a way for us to surface any concerns related to the project early on and see if any changes need to be made. The third thing that people have appreciated is access to Catalyst Ed resources and support. So in general, we take a backseat once the project starts. We see you all as the experts, as well as our partners as the adults in the room who have the knowledge and the expertise needed to move things forward. However, we do recognize that sometimes people just need an additional perspective, or might need help navigating a specific situation. So our experts are always welcome to reach out to us if they have a specific question or they want to know how someone else in the expert network might have navigated a specific challenge. And finally, this is something that we've just started. Experts have also appreciated connections with other Catalyst Ed network members for collaboration and shared learning. So this has typically taken the shape of Catalyst Ed connecting offline different experts who we think would make a really good option for a specific project or just more broadly. We recently launched a Slack channel for all of our network members, and we are hoping that over a period of time, this becomes a resource that experts can use to learn a little bit more about each other, share out learnings from projects, and also, I think, contribute to shaping Catalyst Ed's own model and work moving forward. So let me tell you a little bit about the pricing and fees, since this is a question that folks often have. So as far as project pricing itself is concerned, experts propose their own budget. So we don't tell you what the right price is, because we recognize that folks bring different skills, different approaches, etc. you would essentially propose your own budget in response to the project scope that's there. Most scopes will have a pricing range, however, and again, think of that as a suggested budget or the budget that the organization has available. You should feel free to either propose something that's higher than that pricing range or lower than the pricing range. In our experience, what we've seen is organizations review their different options and pick what they see as the best value. And the proposals can be framed as fixed rate or deliverables-based contracts, in which case you would essentially get paid once either an interim deliverable, either a report or a workshop or a project plan, whatever it is delivered, or as an hourly rate contract. So that's a little bit about project pricing itself. As far as the Catalyst Ed Expert Network members themselves, there is no cost to belonging to the network, to receiving scopes, or to submitting proposals. If and when you're matched to a project, you pay us 10% of the project value. And we don't expect you to pay to us in advance. We just see it as something that you pay us as and when you get paid. And as a nonprofit organization that is committed to being as financially sustainable as possible, while at the same time keeping our own costs really low, we see this as being a valuable source of funding from our own network members to continue work that is hopefully valuable to them. All right, great. So that's the end of my section of this webinar. I'm going to pass this over to BB for the selection process as well as the application tips. And Laurel, do you want to just go ahead and switch the shared screen?
Sure thing. Just a moment.
Okay. As we're pulling it up, I'm going to be talking about, hi everyone, I am going to be talking about the selection process and the process and timeline. So our, there we go. Can everyone see that? Yeah, not yet. Okay.
You know what, maybe while we're getting the technology filled up, Laurel, I just realized that I completely whizzed by the different polls and did not even stop there. Did those run?
They ran.
Yeah, they did.
You want me to work on this?
Okay, great. Do you want to just quickly share out the results?
I was actually thinking of sharing those when I sent out the recording of the webinar. And I've got the technology running. So BB, take it away.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the selection process now. So our objective through this process is to get to know you better, to pinpoint specific areas of expertise, and to understand the context in which you thrive. All of the elements, the application, the interview, and the references are designed to give us additional insights into your expertise. Everyone goes through the same process irrespective of their experience or how well known they are, and we'll step through each of these in greater detail in the next few minutes. But also along the screen, you can see kind of the timeline. So we're accepting applications through the end of June. Interviews will be conducted from mid-July to early August, and then reference conversations will be happening simultaneously or concurrently with the interviews through July, and you'll be notified by mid-August. So the elements of the selection process include the application. So in addition to your resume, work samples, as part of the application, we're going to ask you to identify up to 3 areas of expertise. We have 2 forms, one for individuals and one if you're applying on behalf of a firm. If you're an independent consultant, a sole proprietorship, or doing consulting on the side, then apply as an individual. If, however, you are if you're with a firm, then use the team application and have make sure that either the partner or project director leading the work completes that application. The video interview is an opportunity for us to go deeper into specific examples that showcase your expertise. It will be conducted by a Catalyst Ed team member or a trusted member of the Catalyst Ed network who knows our model well and gets what we're looking for. Interviewers will only have access to your application responses. Your references and work samples will be kept confidential. One item to note is because the interview is relatively short and we want to use that time to get to know you better, we ask that you reach out to us directly with questions about the selection process and our model, and not plan to use the interview time for that. On to the references. These will be conducted via email, survey, or phone call, and we're looking for references who've worked closely with you on projects and are able to speak to your skills and experiences. So we've got some application tips now. We really will kind of go through some do's and don'ts of the selection process. First off, as you plan your application and interview, we'd really like you to reflect on and highlight areas where you have true expertise, rather than areas where you want to develop expertise. We're looking for those areas where you have experience and a track record of success and can truly shine and add value to the education leaders who are seeking help. We had a candidate, for instance, who identified strategic planning as an area of expertise, but when we spoke to his references, they clearly identified communications and strategic plan and stakeholder engagement as his areas of expertise, or his strengths. And so that's an example of one where there was a mismatch between the application and the references. We know it can be sometimes difficult for folks who have done a lot of different things to really identify the areas of true strength, but here are some questions that we hope will help you isolate yours. Experience. Have you worked in this domain or area for a significant length of time, and ideally in multiple contexts? Impact. Can you speak to the impact that you've had through your work? Growth. Have you made mistakes and learned from them? Are you driven to continuously learn and improve? Applicability of learning. Are you able to learn from one context, to apply your learning from one context to another? And comfort and leadership. Are you confident in your expertise and experience such that you can guide others, ask questions, and encourage calculated risk-taking? So just a quick reminder to submit any questions that you have, either about this specifically or about anything that we've covered to date, using the question feature in the chat box. And Leona, do you have anything that you want to jump in with or add at this point?
No, Bibi, I think this is good. I think the only thing I would kind of again stress here is we think all kinds of expertise are important. So I think part of where we see the misalignment sometimes arises is because folks think that a certain kind of expertise is more valuable to us, right? So they think strategic planning will be more important and will get them more projects as a consultant, or they're more likely to be brought into the network if they have that expertise. And so what I want to underscore here is that we think every kind of expertise is important. What we are really interested in is knowing what is that superpower, what is that strength that you have developed over the years, so that you can actually add value to organizations that are facing that challenge. So, one of my favorite projects listed on Catalyst Ed was a Medicaid reimbursement negotiation project, and they essentially wanted someone who understood the ins and outs of Medicaid reimbursement. And that just kind of speaks to the unique skills that are needed in this sector that we often don't even think about. So just reflect on what you bring to the table and let us know about that. Your passion and your knowledge will shine through, and that's exactly what we're looking for.
Great, thank you for that. So the next point that I want to make is to really be specific with your examples. So we want to get a sense of the work that you've done. So as specific as you can be is incredibly helpful to us throughout the selection process. So this is an example of an application response that was not helpful. The candidate had a lot of experience and expertise, but her answer didn't speak to it. There was very little detail, and it was unclear what exactly she did and what her impact was. And then, as you can see, this example is much more specific. She talks about her role in leadership. She talks about her leadership roles within organizations, specific contributions on developing and implementing human capital strategy, and redesigning a teacher recruitment system. Also really hammers home the impact that she had, a 25% increase in pipeline, and talks about her experience advising leaders through consulting work. The purpose of this example is not to show that we are looking for this specific type of experience, but to demonstrate the level of specificity that we want to hear from you.
And if I could just add one more thing here, Bibi, real quick. So, in this particular case, we've highlighted a super specific outcome that could also be quantified in terms of numbers. We recognize that, not all skill sets are equally lend themselves to this kind of, quantifiable outcome. That said, the most helpful examples are those where the experts try to make an attempt to talk about what resulted because of their engagement in that project. So that's just kind of one thought I wanted to put out there, just in case folks are like, wait, I don't know if we had a full evaluation that happened. So don't stress out about that, but do try to think about what the results are.
Great point. Thank you. And so also, we'd love for you to really think through and articulate your value proposition in the interview. So the interviews will ask you to share examples of past work that are reflective of your skills in action. They'll be listening to descriptors of the challenges that you faced, specific steps you took to get to the results, specific outcomes that emerged as a result of your efforts, and what you learned from the experience. We know that these are good practices for any interview, and we're not trying to patronize you, but we do want to make sure that you can take a few minutes to really reflect on your work in advance of the interview and be prepared to share examples of that work. We're looking for examples where you've succeeded and those in which you have struggled. We're not doing this to play gotcha, but really to understand how you approach your work and how you learn from experiences and apply them to future work. Leona, anything to add there? Oh, sorry. I can't see you. Sorry, I'm like, okay, and then for your references, ideally, we're looking for past and current clients. They can be external, or as Leona mentioned, if you haven't worked as an external consultant, they can be internal to your organization or several organizations with whom you've worked as a staff member. But ideally, they'll speak to your strengths and areas of improvement candidly, and know the context in which you thrive and the supports that you may need to be as successful as you can be. Please do note that your references will need to be available during the month of July, and it's going to be your responsibility to make sure that they're able to complete those references. If you haven't worked on projects specifically, any of the following are great substitutes: a board member or supervisor, leader of a partner organization, or someone that's worked closely with you in a project-based situation. Those are our tips for the selection process, as well as the outline of the selection process and timeline. I'm going to go ahead and hand it back over to Leona. Leona, do you want me to continue to drive, or do you want to?
No, I think we've reached the end of. Now we're just essentially going to just open up for questions. And we had a few questions come in as we were going through the content itself. So we'll cover those questions, but then feel free to just continue using the Q&A feature as well as the chat feature to send us any additional questions that might come in. So Our first question is whether we have any resources or recommendations to those who are new to setting up a consultant-style resume, one that highlights specific projects rather than past job. So I think one thought I have here for everyone, but BB, feel free to chime in here if I'm off base. I don't want anyone, I wouldn't want anyone to create a new resume for this. So use the resume that you already have. However, in your application responses as well as in your interview, I think that's the place to talk about specific projects that you might have done within the broader scope of your role in an organization. So for example, in that human capital example that BB shared earlier, BB, if you could go back a couple of slides to that example, I think the next one. So as you can see, the example or the language here talks about a human capital strategy project or a teacher recruitment system project that was implemented within the context of this person's role. And I think that's absolutely appropriate. Maybe feel free to chime in if you want to add something to this.
No, I think that is exactly the point. So don't recreate, don't create don't change your resume or recreate your resume, but also think about using your work samples also as a supplement to your project experience. And again, don't create anything new, but we really want those work samples to showcase your best work, your best thinking, and to give us a sense of the type of project you're capable of doing.
Great. And I'm going to go ahead and answer a question that just came in. So I'm going a little bit out of order here, but I think this might be relevant. This is closely linked here. So the question is, what do you consider a project versus other work experience? And so I think the best way of thinking about what's a project is something that is a scope of work that was very defined, and that needed to be completed in a specific time frame, and there were specific deliverables associated with it. So for instance, again, looking at this particular example of this human capital leader, I'm sure their role had multiple different elements associated with it, some of which were routine and some of which were more specific and time-based. And so implementing that teacher recruitment system is a project, because there would have been a specific time frame when they said, okay, let's do this. What are the challenges here? What steps do we need to take? What changed as a result of that? And all of that hopefully happened within a defined time frame. And we're pretty, we don't want to get stuck in what should that ideal time frame be, because we've seen projects that are as short as a couple of days, and we've seen others that are 2 years long. So I think what's more important is that they have a specific end period and kind of reference all of those questions that BB talked about earlier. So what was the challenge? What were the steps that you took? What was the outcome, and what did you learn? So that's, I think, the best way of thinking about it. We have a question around, are there typical deliverables for clients and projects, and what percentage of projects are conversations with consultants versus something else? So as of now, the pretty much all our projects are more than conversations with consultants. So they are, the typical project right now is about 3 months long. However, the level of intensity during that 3 months might vary a lot. So while some projects might require someone to be almost full-time during those 3 months, other projects might be really low touch or might have a pretty intensive upfront 2 weeks, but then have a much lower level of intensity and maybe just kind of be like conversations across. We also do have some coaching projects. I think those coaching projects can be seen as conversations. However, it's not just a consultation. Those are things that, those are conversations with a very fixed purpose that go on for a specific period of time. So I mean, I hope, Reese, that answered your question as you think about conversations with consultants versus something else. The typical deliverables tend to be things like, it really varies depending on the project itself. So for example, if it's a strategic plan, then deliverables can be things like a report on the current state analysis, so your initial research into what are challenges and opportunities, etc. And then maybe another PowerPoint deck or something that shows what's the new strategy, and then maybe an implementation plan as well as a budget. So that's one set of typical deliverables. If it's a design a personalized learning pilot, for instance, that looks completely different. We've had also things like, can you help us identify curriculum resources that we can include in our technology platform, or stuff like that for schools that are looking to implement personalized learning. So there it could look like a set of resources. So it really kind of varies based on the project itself. Great. So we have a question about
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing. The Catalyst website has a ton of sample projects that might give you a sense of not one specific project, but just point you to the diversity of projects, both in terms of scope and area. So it might serve as a resource for you as you think about that.
Great. So we have a question about whether folks who submitted their application can use these tips to review it again. So what I would suggest here is, so first off, absolutely yes. You should have, once you submitted your application, you should have received an email from us which had your submission attached to it. If you feel like you want to revise your responses, just go ahead and do a new application, and we'll just switch out your two applications. So I think that's really the best way to think about it in case you want to revise what you've already submitted. We also have a question on whether it makes sense for someone who works full-time to apply. Absolutely. So I think a big part of what we are trying to do is bring in the talent that's embedded within organizations that folks may sometimes not know about. We totally recognize that if you have a full-time role, you may not be able to take on a giant project which requires you to spend 40 plus hours a week. I think in those cases, the kinds of projects that would be best suited for you would be either projects that are weekend based, or you can do it over evenings, or it might be conversations, or it might be a project where you're sharing out resources that you already have developed for your organization. And we've definitely had a few of those where folks, even those who have full-time roles, have been able to add a lot of value. And especially given that they are in the trenches in a manner of speaking, and so can provide some really actionable advice and feedback. Great. So we have a question about whether we will send out the slides after the webinar. I know that Laurel's responded to it, but just very quickly, yes, we will be sharing out both the slides as well as a recording of this webinar. So you'll be able to refer back to our words of wisdom, or share it with others that you think might be interested. Elsa's asking whether so we have someone who's transitioning out of education and looking for a way to stay engaged and contribute to education. And so would it make a difference if they shifted to a different field? So from Catalyst Ed's perspective, absolutely not, because what we are looking at is the expertise that you've accumulated through all of your years within education. I think the one kind of consideration you should keep in mind is that when you're responding to projects, sometimes you might have some partner organizations or some leaders say, oh, well, this person doesn't work in education anymore. So I think you need to kind of make sure that in your responses to projects, you are able to really speak to how your years of experience and expertise in education set you up well to do this project, even though you're not currently in the sector. But that said, yes, you should absolutely consider applying for the Catalyst Network, because we do see a big role that you can play. And in fact, part of what we're doing here is trying to make sure that we don't lose all of that investment, in a sense, that all of us have collectively made in you. We have this question on whether projects allow remote work or whether travel or relocation is required. So pretty much all our projects can be done remotely. And so, in fact, we often have situations where our partner organizations will say they have a strong preference for someone who's local, but will sometimes end up selecting someone who's working remotely because they can see that this person brings a really aligned set of skills and experiences that will set them up to do this project well, even if they are working, even if they're not there in their office. And so I think, this is also, so as you kind of think about remote work, I think there's a whole set of best practices related to remote work. But I think a lot of it comes down to being able to build relationships quickly, understand what's going on in the project context, being able to use any on-site visits very thoughtfully and strategically, so you're getting the most out of it, and then just being super on top of things, because you're not going to be there most of the time to make sure things happen. So you need to be really good over email and everything else. So almost all our projects are done remotely. It's never been a challenge for us so far, or for our experts. But it does require a specific set of skills, as well as access to things like, either Skype or Zoom or something else. So I would recommend that you kind of, check through all of those. We have a question on whether projects provide a budget, giving consultants an idea on what their rate should be. So the projects, as I mentioned earlier, do provide, so maybe if you could just go back a couple of slides to the pricing thing. So most of the, almost all project scopes will have an indicative budget range that will help you gain a sense of what the partner is looking to spend on this project. That said, you should look at proposing a price that makes the most sense for you. Pricing, I feel like we can do a whole different webinar just on pricing. It's a question that keeps coming up. The only thing I would kind of say here is that it's as much an art as it is a science. There are going to be huge variations across people. You should think about what's the price or what's the budget that makes the most sense to you, given your capacity, given your interest, given how much time it's going to take you, and given the value that you add to the organization. So, keep all of those things in mind. Your pricing can also vary across projects. So you might respond to one particular project and price it at a certain level, and then change your pricing for another similar project, either because you now have more information about the value you add, or because you just want that project more badly. So, think less about what's the one right price, and think more about what's the overall budget that will help you do this project well, and that will also reimburse you fairly for the value that you're adding. All of that said, we'll also need to pull together a resource on pricing. And so this is a reminder yet again that we need to do that. Vivi, you were saying something when I interrupted you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was interrupting you. I just wanted to add to that. The pricing range is usually also an indicator of the level of detail for that project. So if it's a strategic planning project with a $50,000 budget or a strategic planning project with a $10,000 budget, obviously the deliverables and what is associated with that project is going to vary pretty drastically. And so we hope that the pricing range will give you an indication of what they're actually looking for in their deliverables so it's one more indicator of what they're looking for.
Because additionally, when we do the scoping conversations, we're pretty upfront about what value begets what deliverable. We don't make any, we don't just say, oh, okay, well, maybe we'll be able to get someone at that price. We make sure that we stand up for like the value of your work.
We have a question on what project areas have the fewest experts. Laurel or BB, do you mind moving to a couple of slides before this to the project areas? So, great, thank you. So so the question was, what project areas have the fewest experts, and should folks apply with all of their different project experiences or strategically select the areas of need? I wouldn't get kind of caught up in what are the areas of greatest need, because there are some projects which where we see a fair amount of activity, so strategy, fundraising, evaluation, human capital, etc. I mean, these are all projects that tend to have a lot more activity in them, so a lot more of those projects get listed. But there also are a lot more experts in those areas, and so and at the same time, if you have an area like English language learners, where the number of really great experts we have is relatively small. It's also true, however, that the number of projects we've had in that area has been relatively small. So all of that to say, again, I wouldn't worry too much about how much your areas align to what the need is out there. The kinds of projects keep varying, the experts keep varying. We also don't have a quota of, we want only so many special ed people, or we're looking for only so many human capital people. What we are really looking for is areas where you shine, where you bring your deepest expertise. So that's what I would recommend that you let us know through your application. And then related, Bibi, do you want to add anything to that specific question?
Reinforce your point. It's that when you're going to do your best work in areas where you bring deep expertise and you know the work, and remember that you're going to be competing against other people. And so if it's an area where you might have done one strategic planning project, but your strength is around fundraising, if you can identify fundraising as your strength with a strategic component, that adds such tremendous value, and it makes you much more competitive when you're bidding on projects, because that's your true north. In some way, I'm not articulating that in exactly the way that I think we've talked about in the past, Leona, but just want to kind of hammer home that you're trying to communicate your value add and where you can really bring deep expertise rather than what organizations might see, because they'll be able to kind of see through and see through your application and your candidacy. And so when you're relying on your strengths, it differentiates consultants from one another.
Absolutely. And then we have a question. I just realized we're out of time, but so let me answer this one last question. How many project opportunities will you communicate monthly/annually? So let's talk about the two ways in which the one way in which we've been communicating opportunities so far, and how we will do it starting August. So right now, all our project opportunities are communicated via email. So we send you emails each time a project that's linked to your area of expertise is listed. So what that means is that Depending on your area of expertise, that could really vary. So strategy, for example, because there are so many strategy projects, we ping people quite frequently. Whereas some of the other areas, you might get pinged just once a quarter or so. Starting August, what we're also going to be doing is using our Slack channel to share out any projects that we have an okay from our partners to do so. So in those cases, you'll also just get a sense of other projects that are out there that may not be aligned to your biggest skill set. So I hope that kind of answers your question. Great. So we are at the end of our time. Do you have a quick follow-up?
I just wanted to also make sure that you're white labeling our emails so that you do get correspondence from us. Sometimes it goes to spam folders, so just make sure that you're checking on that and things from Catalyst Ed, so that you are able to receive both alerts about the application process, but as well as project identification.
Absolutely. And that also reminds me, one of the things that I do want to reinforce is that we will have another webinar for everyone who's brought into the network in early August. And that webinar will become a place for us to get much more granular and detailed about how the matching process and response process works, as well as some of these tips and tricks like white label or it's not white. There's a specific term for it, but essentially you mark the email so that it doesn't go into your spam folder, and of course for those who are on Gmail, make sure that it's come on your primary inbox. So we are way over our time. Thank you all so much for making the time to be on this call. We are so excited to hear from all of you. Feel free to send us any emails, any other questions via email. So info@catalysted.org, and Laurel will make sure it gets to the right person and that you have a response. Laurel will also be sharing out webinar slides, webinar recording, as well as some questions that came up, responses to questions that came up today. Right, Laurel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Yes, so please feel free to reach out if anything else comes up. All right, everyone, thank you so much once again. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.